Made of Flesh by Nicholas Francis. Hi, everybody. There are strange things done in the midnight sun by the men who moil for gold. The Arctic trails have their secret tales that would make your blood run cold. The Northern Lights have seen queer sights, but the queerest they ever did see was that night on the marge of Lake LaBarge I cremated Sam McGee. All right. In case you're wondering why I'm reading that, June on the Range is coming. And just now you ask what the cremation of Sam McGee, which is set during the gold rush, has to do at all with Westerns. What are Westerns have to do with the gold rush? Okay. All right. So I suppose I should clue you in here. First of all, I'm going to review the Nicholas Francis book. The book is called, it's not a book, actually, it's a short story. Made of Flesh, a horror story by Nicholas Francis. And it's about a guy named El Gringo. And it's set in Argentina during the late 1800s sometime. And El Gringo is an American who happens to be traveling around down south somewhere. And he gets in a bar fight one night, and a bunch of bandits, led by a guy named Cuchillo Garcia, they kidnap him. And they take him to an isolated place. He witnesses a sacrifice, and they end up going down to this underground place looking for treasure. All this happens in a pretty short time. It's a fun read. It's a lot of blood and guts. I think that it sort of glosses over parts where it could be a little bit more detailed. And it's one of those stories where I think how do I explain this? The imagination sort of outweighs the result. And I find that I'm always a little bit frustrated with stories like that the author's ideas are kind of bigger than their writing, their ability to get them across in a magical sort of way. But that's my opinion. I'll give it about 3.5 stars. It's a fun read. Lots of gore, lots and lots of gore. But because it's a short story, we don't really spend enough time in this world to kind of have an effect, right? That's my opinion. And because June on the Range is coming up, I wanted to just kind of have a little bit of a introduction to some short stories. So I also listened to the audiobook of a couple of Louis L'Amour stories. And those were... Sorry, I had to look those up. I couldn't remember the titles. His Brother's Debt and A Trail to Pie Town were the titles. Again, okay. They didn't really, they weren't magical. They didn't grab me, but they were pretty standard. Lone guy, has a secret past, ends in a gunfight. I don't know. I think one of the reasons, I didn't participate in June on the Range because I wasn't really kind of trying to participate in as many YouTube kind of events last year as I am trying to do or have been since then. But I'm not a big Western reader, so I've been trying to kind of get my head around what exactly is a Western, what it means, why it's always been so popular. So I guess by definition, in order to properly be a Western, it has to take place in the Restoration period after the Civil War, and it has to take place in the American South. And those are like the only criteria, but it's a really narrow time and place for a story to be set. And then, of course, there are the usual tropes, the stranger, the idea of American individualism, the idea of conquering the wilderness, and so on. Now, the reason I brought up Sam McGee was I was wondering how the Canadian expansion into the West, which happened around the same time. I mean, Canada became a country in 1867, and our expansion into the West started to happen after that. And apparently, a Canadian Western is more appropriately called a Northern. And a lot of the time, when you have stories about Western Canada, you're either dealing with the gold rush or with the Northwest Mounted Police, which later became the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the Mounties. And that's what a lot of Canadian themed westerns tend to involve. So, of course, Sam McGee being about the gold rush, I just thought I'd read it, and it's one of my all-time favorites. Really, I love that poem. I always have, except to kind of take away from it. I also figured out that Bud the Spud has the same rhyme scheme, and so there are strange things done in the midnight sun by the men who moil for gold. Doesn't quite have the same ring. Anyway, so for the rest of June, I picked up The Englishman's Boy, which was a book about set around the Cyprus Massacre, which I didn't even know anything about. I remember in I think we're going back to about grade 7. All I remember reading about that time period was the Métis uprising as Manitoba started to expand, and they started to write treaties about land ownership and so on, and Louis Riel being hanged. And that was probably one of the more interesting time periods in Canadian history, because Canadian history just isn't really all that interesting for the most part. But the Cyprus Massacre, I guess, happened around the U.S. border, and it involved, I mean, long story short, an American hunter, his hunter/trader, and some Canadian whiskey traders. The one guy's horse was stolen, and he went to an Assiniboine camp to try and retrieve it, and just absolute chaos ensued, and there ended up being a huge firefight, and something like 14 people died. And that was one of the main catalysts for developing the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. As a Canadian identity, so much of our identity really just comes down to we're not Americans. And at the time, we had these wide open borders and no way to keep the Americans out. And this kind of, sort of violence was a threat. And so the Royal Canadian Mounted Police really just was put in place to ensure that this kind of thing didn't happen. But, they only had 300 people to patrol almost 500,000 square kilometers. So they had to be mounted. They had to be, they had to really go a long, long way. So I'm looking forward to reading that book. And I guess the other challenge for June on the Range is you have to read at least one Zane Grey and at least one Lewis L'Amour. So I picked up a Zane Grey book, which is available for free on Kindle. And I'm trying to decide for the Lewis L'Amour if I want to read The Quick and the Dead, which is considered one of the all-time, greatest, right up there with Lonesome Dove, or if I want to read Hondo because it's one of Al Bundy's favorites. So I know the weird things that inform my choices, right? The other, I also have The Hexslinger by Gemma Files. I might read at least the first volume of that. I know I'm trying to feel for words here. I'm not quite awake yet. Or the other book that I want to check out is the Boone Trilogy by Ed Kurtz. So I haven't quite decided what the other book is going to be. Both, and also June being Pride Month, I always try to read at least one book by an LGBTQ plus author or dealing with LGBT issues. So that's the plan for June. I do still have a couple things in the can for Mayhem, and there will probably be at least one more video before the end of May. And yes, I am still not doing well in my life, but a couple more weeks it'll all be, hopefully it'll all be figured out one way or the other. So either I'll be coming to you from library parking lot, or I'm homeless, or things will be okay for another little while. So hope for the best for me. Hope you're reading lots of horror. Have a great day.